A wealthy tourist, drunk on arrogance and privilege, thought he could break a royal guard's composure. He spat in his face, expecting outrage, expecting a reaction. But what he got instead was something far more powerful: an unshakable lesson in dignity, discipline, and true strength. What happened next left the crowd in stunned silence and sent a global message about respect and honor. The scorching summer sun blazed over Buckingham Palace, its golden rays bouncing off the towering gates where hundreds of tourists gathered. The air hummed with excitement as people snapped photos and waved, hoping for a glimpse of British royalty. Among them stood guard Thomas Blackwood, unmoving, disciplined, and committed to his duty. At 29, Blackwood was not just any guard. He had served in the Queen's Guard for 8 years, but his true test of discipline had come long before that, during a tour in Afghanistan. He knew what it meant to stand firm under pressure, whether in the face of war or the mocking of tourists who saw his role as nothing more than a ceremonial display. Every morning, he woke before dawn, spending hours ensuring his uniform was immaculate. To the world, the guards may appear as lifeless statues, but for Blackwood, every polished button and every perfect crease symbolized a tradition that had stood for centuries. Most days, he endured the curious glances, the jokes, and the occasional taunts. But on this particular afternoon, one man would take it too far. Among the crowd was a group of American tourists, led by Kevin Reynolds. Wealth dripped from his expensive polo shirt and designer sunglasses, but so did arrogance. He was used to being the center of attention. His family's own money had ensured that back home in Texas, but here, in front of the stoic figure of Guard Blackwood, his privilege meant nothing. With a smug grin, Reynolds turned to his friends, all of them already recording on their phones. "Bet you $50 I can make him crack," he chuckled, stepping forward. At first, his attempts were childish. He made faces, took selfies, waved exaggeratedly, but Blackwood didn't move. The crowd around them began to grow, some amused, others uncomfortable. Then, Reynolds took it up a notch. He leaned in, reeking of expensive scotch and ego. "What's with the funny hat, man? Did you lose a bet?" He reached up as if to touch Blackwood's bearskin cap but hesitated, remembering the warnings about not interfering with the guards. A British woman in the crowd spoke up, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Show some respect, young man." Reynolds turned to the audience with a dramatic bow. "Respect, for what? Standing around like a mannequin." His sunglasses caught the sun as he scoffed. "My tax dollars probably pay for this whole circus." Several American tourists exchanged embarrassed glances, distancing themselves from his behavior, but Reynolds wasn't done yet. His voice took on a theatrical edge. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's see if these guys are actually human." Then, before anyone could react, he did the unthinkable. He spat. The spit landed just below Blackwood's right eye. The world seemed to pause. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the birds overhead seemed to fall silent. But Blackwood, he didn't flinch. He didn't move. He stood as still as ever. Reynolds smirked, expecting outrage, expecting anger. What he got instead was something far more powerful. The crowd's reaction was swift and divided. Some gasped in shock, others turned away in disgust, and a few reached for their phones, eager to capture what they assumed would be a fiery explosion from the otherwise silent soldier. Even some of Reynolds' own friends hesitated, their initial amusement shifting into unease. A young boy standing beside his father clutched his hand tightly. "Why did he do that, Dad?" he whispered, his voice filled with confusion. The father knelt down and spoke softly, "Because some people think respect is a joke. But watch, son, this guard is about to show him what real strength looks like." Reynolds, however, was still caught up in his own arrogance. Encouraged by the presence of an audience, he took another step forward. "What's wrong, statue man?" he sneered, waving a hand in front of Blackwood's face. "Too scared to move? Or do they program you guys to be emotionless robots?" From the edge of the crowd, an elderly woman wearing a Royal Service medal pinned to her blazer clenched her jaw. "This is disgraceful," she muttered, shaking her head. A man beside her, likely her husband, nodded. "Disgraceful, indeed. That guard represents centuries of honor, and that boy wouldn't know honor if it slapped him across the face." Palace security had taken notice, but they hesitated, assessing the situation. Guards were trained to handle disrespect, but this had crossed the line. One officer radioed in for backup while another slowly pushed through the crowd toward the scene. Meanwhile, Reynolds was reveling in his own ignorance. He turned to the crowd, lifting his arms. "Come on, people. This is supposed to be entertainment, right? What's the fun in a guard who just stands there like a doll?" A British teenager standing nearby muttered, "Mate, you should stop now before you embarrass yourself even more." But Reynolds either didn't hear or didn't care. He reached forward, as if to push Blackwood's shoulder. This time, the atmosphere in the crowd shifted completely. Some recoiled, recognizing that he was about to make a grave mistake. A veteran standing near the front tensed, his knuckles white. The father from earlier stepped forward slightly, prepared to intervene if necessary. Just as Reynolds' fingertips hovered inches from Blackwood's uniform, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the air. "Don't you dare." Silence fell over the crowd. Even Reynolds froze. The voice had come from an elderly man in the crowd, his posture rigid, his presence commanding. A former military officer, judging by his bearing. He took a step forward, glaring at Reynolds. "You have no idea the kind of discipline and honor it takes to stand in that man's position. The sacrifices he has made, the battles he has fought, and you're nothing but a drunk fool trying to tear down something you could never understand." For the first time, Reynolds hesitated. His friends had stopped laughing. The onlookers were no longer amused. The energy had changed completely. And then, as if timed perfectly, the rhythmic march of the guard captain and his patrol echoed through the courtyard. Reynolds' smirk wavered. Palace security was now approaching quickly, the growing tension thick in the air. The game was over, and soon, he would realize just how badly he had miscalculated. The next words that left Blackwood's mouth would be remembered long after that day. "I took an oath," he began, his voice steady and strong. "Not just to the crown, but to everything these gates stand for: tradition, honor, sacrifice." His gaze locked onto Reynolds, who now looked far less confident. "While you were in a pub, gathering the courage to mock what you don't understand, I was standing guard over a history that stretches back centuries." The crowd listened in stunned silence. "You see this uniform? Before I earned the right to wear it, I served a tour in Afghanistan. I have watched brothers in arms fall, defending the values you ridicule." Reynolds tried to speak, but a sharp look from the guard captain silenced him. Blackwood turned to the audience, addressing them all. "We don't stand here as statues or tourist attractions. We stand as living reminders of discipline and honor. We endure the heat, the cold, the rain, and yes, even the occasional fool who mistakes our discipline for weakness." Then, his voice softened. "You wanted to know if we are human." He let the words sink in. "We are. We feel every insult, every joke, every attempt to break our composure. But we stand firm because that is what duty demands." Tears glistened in the eyes of an elderly RAF veteran in the crowd. Parents clutched their children closer, whispering the lesson unfolding before them. Reynolds had no words. His arrogance had vanished. His friends, once eager to film, now stood in awkward silence. The police stepped forward. "Assaulting a Queen's Guard is a serious offense," an officer stated. "You'll have plenty of time to reflect on Guard Blackwood's words while we process your case." As Reynolds was led away, his expensive sunglasses slipped from his collar, clattering to the ground forgotten. Within hours, the footage of the incident spread across social media. But, unlike typical prank videos, this one sparked a different conversation. #RespectTheGuard began trending worldwide. People praised Blackwood's unwavering strength. Schools played the speech in classrooms. Military training programs used it as an example of maintaining authority with dignity, even in disgrace. Reynolds learned his lesson, his punishment. A fine, but more importantly mandatory community service at veterans organizations. For the first time in his privileged life, he would serve those who had served, and as for Guard Blackwood, the very next day, he resumed his post, standing tall, standing proud. The world now knew what he had always known: true strength isn't about power or aggression. It's about standing firm in your values, even when tested. What would you have done in Guard Blackwood's position? Could you have shown such restraint and dignity? Let us know in the comments. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Guard's Moments for more powerful stories of honor and respect. And hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Because true strength isn't about breaking others down, it's about standing tall when it matters most.